Welcome to the Reconnected Podcast, a home for sharing, understanding, and growth for the retail grocery store industry. During each episode, we will meet an amazing member of our community as we learn about their story and jointly explore the intricacies and challenges of our supply chain. Through it all, we'll remember and honor that everything starts with the real people who spend so much of their lives supporting the retail food supply chain. We will bring together the voices of manufacturers, distributors, and retailers as we journey together to help our industry reconnect. My name is Luke Abbott, and I'm excited to have you join us. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Reconnected Podcast. And today we are joined by Kenny Hausmann, who's been a good friend of mine, become even closer over the last year. And as I was thinking about who to have on the podcast next, I was thinking about one of the people that I admire for how you've always shown up as someone willing to talk, willing to give feedback, like fully participating, especially with emerging and mid-sized brands. And I'm really honored to have you here, Kenny, and want to give you a space to do kind of a high-level introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds good, Luke. I'm equally as excited to be here, and thank you for that really generous introduction. I have the utmost respect for you and your team, and I've been really appreciative of both the professional and the personal relationship we've been able to cultivate together over the last couple of years. But me in a nutshell, my name is Kenny Hausmann. I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and my story in the retail grocery space is not atypical to most. I started in my neighborhood grocer called Tops Markets about almost 20 years ago now, believe it or not, just pushing carts as a part-time job through the latter years of high school and through college, and worked my way up through the stores a little bit methodically, got to expose, get some experience in a lot of different areas of the business, which was great, but found the way of sales, marketing, and merchandising through an internship at the office at Tops, and the rest is history. So I joined the corporate side in about 2007, methodically worked my way up through their category management model. And those who don't know Tops, it's the typical regional grocer, typical conventional retailer, but had a great opportunity to work with a lot of great individuals, got to learn the business from the ground up, and eventually worked my way up to category manager. Got to manage a lot of different areas of the business. And the last role I had with them was managing natural and organics and specialty foods wall to wall, which is just a really unique experience. It allowed me to pursue both my passions, grocery retail and health and wellness. And my personal mission, whether you're a retailer or a vendor or a distributor alike, is really providing access to healthy, nutritious foods to the communities of which we serve. So that's really been at the root of kind of how I operate as a human being and in business. 13-year career at Tops. From that point, I really wanted to experience some new things. So I had a short sojourn in St. Louis, which unfortunately didn't work out. But what I can say is, in those situations, you learn a couple different things. You learn who you want to be, but of course, who you don't want to be, which is equally as important. So made the jump over to Fresh Thyme in about 2017 for the first stint. And that was a place where I truly thrived. I worked with such a great group of individuals that really believed in me, helped me rebuild my confidence as a merchant, and truly got to live in a place where I was truly passionate, the natural channel, and had a variety of roles with them, worked in a lot of different spaces, and met a lot of great individuals along the way and a lot of great mentors along the way. Also, Chicago is where they're based, and it's near and dear to my heart, as I met my now partner, wife, Kathy, where we got married about a little over a year ago. And then from there, the relationship has just blossomed ever since. Of course, had a great first stint at Fresh Thyme, but Kathy and I like to consider ourselves students of the world. So we made the leap over to Hawaii, and I worked for a family-owned company called Foodland out there. Really great company, and I got to experience Hawaii life, and my retail journey out there was pretty unique. We're there for about 2 years, and as beautiful as Hawaii was and the organization I was working with was, we realized what was important to us, Kathy and I, was getting closer to friends and family. So we made the leap back to Chicago, and fortunately enough, I was able to run it back at Fresh Thyme Market and working for Jonathan Lawrence again, which is super exciting. And I've just been really reinvigorated and re-inspired, returning the team. I'm actually managing a different area of business that I haven't been as familiar with, leading what we call our natural living team. And it's just been super exciting to really be involved in that area and learn something new.
That's beautiful. Thank you for the introduction. And I think you left out maybe like one or two family members that are very important in your household.
Yeah, I did. I did. So there's quite a few, but really what's really important outside of Kathy, my wife, my father is very important to me.
Mhm.
One of the impetuses for coming back to the islands, but huge influences on my life, two individuals in particular, my grandfather
Mhm.
and my little brother Kyle.
Oh,
So
wow.
starting with my little brother Kyle, he was super influential in my life. Unfortunately, he did pass away about 7 years ago through some neurological complications, but he actually had autism.
Mhm.
And autism, as most folks know, there's a wide, broad degree of the spectrum. What I could say about my little brother, growing up in the early '90s, there most certainly wasn't as many resources as we have today in
Mhm.
support of folks like Kyle. But he was just a really unique individual and really forced not only us as kids to grow up a little quicker, but how we reach and communicate with each other in different ways because Kyle was nonverbal. So you had to
Oh, wow.
communicate with
His
him
his whole life?
his whole life, nonverbal.
Wow.
So
How
you
did
had
you
to,
communicate?
that's a really good question. We communicated through a lot of body language and he could
Okay.
understand language and those sort of things. But, Luke, it was just a special connection. It's kind of that brotherly
Mhm.
connection at a different level. So
Mhm.
really had to kind of read his body language, understand kind of how he was feeling emotionally through that to
Mhm.
really get to reach him. And it's funny, Luke, because you spend your whole life as an older brother trying to
Yeah.
figure out how can I teach my younger brother the world.
Yeah.
And honestly, Luke, I learned more from him than I could have
Mhm.
ever taught him. And it's such
Wow.
a huge influence on my life, such a huge
How
influence.
many years older than him were you?
I am 4 years older than him,
4 years. Okay. Okay. And how long ago did he pass away?
about 7 years ago.
Okay. Okay. And was it expected that that would happen eventually, like early in his life, or?
Yeah, that not necessarily at that time.
Hmm.
Typically with his degree of autism, he was developing some neurological challenges, seizures and whatnot. And because he was nonverbal as well, medications and things like that were always difficult to manage.
Yeah.
Though we weren't expecting it, I know he's in a better place.
Yeah. Yeah. For free, free and running around and talking, I'm sure. So,
That's
um,
right.
yeah. And who took care of him? Like, if he really wasn't able to be like, he wasn't, did he ever live alone or was he always with family?
He was pretty much with family up until he reached about 16 years old, and we were able to get him in a really, really great work home,
Hmm.
group home environment, which was awesome, Luke,
Hmm.
because he got to interact with kids just like him and adults just like him. And they had a lot of different resources available at his disposal, which was just super, super helpful. And we were so grateful to be able to kind of take up that opportunity because, as you know, it's really difficult
Yeah.
to manage through that. But we were able to get him into that, and that was really instrumental for him and his continued development into
Sure.
adulthood.
Yeah. And some level of independence from the family and stuff too, in a way. And it's beautiful. And I'm curious, this, obviously his life touched you in some profound ways as you think about like how he kind of, in many ways, lives on today, right? Like how does he influence you today?
Yeah, that's a really really good question. I think he influences me in so many ways, Luke. I think it's just how I interact and just my personality and how I can invoke emotion in others through nonverbal means and as I approach even business,
Yeah.
it's the same thing. How I relate to individuals, how I always can look on the other side of the table and really
Hmm.
relate to that individual that I'm speaking with and not just tailor my message, but truly listen to and actively listen. I think, is something I truly learned from Kyle as well. Even though he wasn't verbal, you had to really understand what was going around him to truly understand what he was going through. So
Yeah.
that's really how it's influenced me today. And I mean, I'm constantly learning new things and I'm constantly
Hmm.
learning, new things about myself. And I truly attribute that to Kyle because he established that drive and that desire to want to do that.
Wow. It's amazing because the story could be told in a lot of different ways, right? Like this is just a sad story, right? And it's interesting in so many ways, like what might be our purpose in this life. Some of it is certainly like how we impact others, right? How we inspire and how we help others to grow. And I don't know about you, but I found that through challenge and struggle in my life, right, is how I've grown the most. Without it, I wouldn't be. I get sharpened by it, if you will. Does that resonate with you?
Completely resonates with me, Luke. Obviously, challenge helps you grow. You have to work through it, in your way. And through that, you learn so much about yourself, what's going on around you. And I can tell you this, I've learned so much more from my challenges in life
Hmm.
than I did, and even my successes, though I've learned a lot from those too.
Yep.
But it's helped me really rise above that and help me learn, help me grow, and help me even take success in a real productive way as well.
Hmm. When you went to Hawaii, and was that because you took over? I think you owned all of like Nosh across the entire store. Is that right? Was that my understanding of your role?
That's correct. It was kind of getting back to my roots
Yeah.
into a certain degree. And what intrigued me about the role, Luke, was that, and also working for a family-owned company, and I truly felt like the Nosh business was a little underrepresented,
Yeah.
across the islands, and no better retailer to do it with than Foodland, which is
Of
the
course.
largest locally owned company, let
Right.
alone retailer across the islands. And what was interesting about them, and I know we had the opportunity to visit some stores together
Yeah,
out
we
there,
did.
which was
That was
one
so
of the
much fun.
highlights of my 2 years for sure. As traditional as they were, they really had the appetite to really try new things
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
evolve, which you don't see a lot. You don't see a lot of companies with that type of tradition, with the openness to do that. So that was just super
Mhm.
exciting.
Yeah, no, I see it. And I remember visiting the stores with you, and you were kind of describing the setup, that this idea that there's category managers that you say, hey, this set is owned by this person, and then here's a few items we were able to work together on. And it feels like that takes a really special person, right? Because in many ways, you don't get to make the call. You get to make a suggestion. In some ways, you're like brokering Nosh internally to the company. How how do you how do you do that? Well, because in a way you don't have the power, right? Like to just say this needs to be like maybe you do like today in Fresh Time, your current role, right? You
Mm-hmm.
you get to determine the category assortment. Here you recommended it, and yet I saw throughout the store all the products that you had recommended that they were integrating. How does that happen? Is that driven by you? Is it driven by you in management, or how did that happen?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I think when an organization, especially more of like what we'll call a conventional Ford retailer, is trying to get into Nosh, it's important that you have that support from the top.
Mm-hmm.
You really need it. And it's not necessarily like a specific percent or a percentage of penetration we're looking for. It's just that support that really helps drive that. And my thought process is, of course, being that kind of leader of that team,
Mm-hmm.
that's who we were. We treated ourselves as a vendor
Yep.
presenting to a category manager. And ultimately, my thought process is always, how is that going to contribute to the category? How is it going to grow my category? How is it
Mm-hmm.
going to reach my customer? And I feel like through that thought of like inclusion and providing them the information and the compelling data and how it's going to fit within their mix, that really proved to be effective,
Mm-hmm.
just in the overall approach. It's more of, hey, I have an opportunity for you to help grow your category, because
There we
what
go.
category
There we go.
manager
I love
doesn't
to
want
hear
to grow
that.
their, yeah, who doesn't want to grow their category?
Yes.
And also, I had a little bit of luck too in the timing as the business was flourishing at that point. So
Hmm.
we're thinking about different ways to grow coming off the heels of COVID, right? So
Yes.
that was really a great time to really incorporate the business in a bigger way
Hmm.
across the organization. And a lot of open-minded category managers, that were really looking towards the future. Of
Hmm.
course, you always have some challenging conversations. Sometimes you have to push. Could be assertive at times, but I truly believe you got to bring the other individual along to
Hmm.
help ultimately grow. Because you want their support too. That you want them to buy into it, buy into the promotions, buy
Hmm.
into the merchandising strategy, and make sure that it's thoughtfully merchandised throughout the store, and it's not an afterthought, right? It's
Right.
something that is truly going to add incrementality to their business, and a true way that Foodland at the time could differentiate. I mean,
Yes.
you think about all the competition that's coming to the islands right
Yes.
now. There's
Totally.
so much national, even local, and quite frankly, there's such a deep connection, with locals and the food that they eat.
Hmm.
We local first, of course, but there's just such this deep connection of how food interacts with body, mind, spirit. So it kind of fit in line with what we were trying to achieve on my team at Foodland at the
I,
time.
I love it. And it's interesting. There's a humility in what you said, the approaching my coworkers as a vendor, right? And and like I don't get to choose. And then you also mentioned this idea of assertiveness, um, which is interesting, right? Because it said that there was enough trust between you and the category managers where there was a space for you to be heard and where you could even be pushing a little bit. And I'm curious how you built that trust with that team. Again, I'm looking at this from the standpoint of like it's a very difficult role because you can't make the decisions. You have to influence others, you know, and how and then you mentioned this assertiveness, which means that there were times when you didn't agree.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll start with this. The good thing about Foodland is it's about business and the betterment of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I had really good interpersonal relationships with a lot of the category managers, which did take time, right?
Yep.
Going to Hawaii, someone from the mainland, there's
Right.
that mentality behind it.
Yes.
So you have to really earn that trust. And the way I kind of did that, Luke, in the beginning was just doing whatever I could to help the organization,
Mm.
putting my head down, going to stores, throwing up stock, cleaning up cases on top
Yes.
of my day job. All those little things made such a big difference in my relationships with the other category
Yep.
managers. There also was this realization that, hey, I know what I know, but I don't know what I don't know. And Kenny was brought in to help us explore that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really with that mindset, I was able to make some, headway. I found that the fresh areas were always the most challenging to work with
Yep.
because, you got perishables, you got a limited amount of space, it's got to work. So the way I kind of worked about it was I focused on, I prioritized. I focused on center store first and
Mm-hmm.
really trying to build out that mix and in key categories. And when I had success stories to tell, that really drove motivation amongst the other category managers. But
Yeah, I love it.
again, business aside, I truly believe you got to build strong interpersonal relationships in order to build strong business relationships.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I loved your approach. It's like I hit the low-hanging fruit was what you knew you could do in grocery with lower risk. Once people were able to see, oh, you're having success, and people are sharing stories about things you had accomplished in partnership, then to your point, Fresh should be much more into it, because you already proved yourself in this environment, which makes I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And if you and also the humility I think that you demonstrated. I remember when I started my first day at Jimbo's when I was there, like I did it at a grocery store, working in that store. And I think in grocery it just struck me. I don't have a lot of experience. Obviously, you have a lot more than I do, but it seems like there's a respect building, a showing of like I'm not above you, that I'm here. I'm just like you, and I can go throw a load. I can go work in a store. I can get my hands and feet and my mind closer to the customer. That felt brilliant. Did someone suggest that to you, or was that just like that just came to you as like the way to go?
Over time, through my mentors,
Hmm.
through trials and tribulations, I've always been kind of that type of person, just put my head down and help.
Yep.
But, I will admit, through the experiences I've had, some of the moves I've made in
Hmm.
business has taught me humility is not a bad thing. Now, I will say it needs to be authentic and
Yeah,
genuine,
yeah, yeah. Agreed.
because you can really read right past if someone's not being genuine and authentic about it.
Yep.
But that's just always been, who I am. I think what's changed over the last couple of years, especially, is yes, I'm humble, but also I try to be as confident as I can too, and knowing what I do know and
Hmm.
how I can influence others in the business in hopefully a positive way. But yeah, I would say humility is can it be taught to a certain degree, but I think it's inherent within
Yeah.
you or so or less. And what I mean by taught is if it truly is within you
Yeah.
through your lessons of life, you're
Yep.
going to be able to demonstrate it and illustrate it.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And yeah, it's interesting you bring up this idea of humility, and then I think almost this theme of like still being able to be assertive about what you believe, right? And I think probably why you put that together is that we often think of people as being humble as sometimes being meek, or just not speaking up, or just being like the quote unquote nice guy. And that isn't. And I think for me, and I think how I see you is the humility is open mindedness. It's also of not seeing yourself as above anybody else, right? In a grocery store chain, for example, everybody is there with the low margins, right? Everyone is there because they have a role to do, and everyone's role is really, really important and integral to the operation of this organization. And for you demonstrate that you believe that when you go in a store and you do a store level job that you don't have to do. It's like, no, I see you, you matter. And then the other side of it is to be able to admit that you're wrong and being like this growth mindset, right? I had it yesterday where I was talking to a client and I really thought I was right, Kenny, and they wanted to have their product merchandised in produce and we were talking to the dairy buyer and I think I was really attached to being in dairy and then I felt like I was a little bit short in terms of how I approached the client. And then she spoke her reasons why, and I was like, you're so right. I'm so wrong. And like the ability to be open-minded, right? I think is core there. So I think that they're almost like there's two different ideas, right? To be humble, you can still be assertive. You can still speak your mind. But humble is just open-mindedness in my mind. I don't know how you see it.
I see it pretty similarly, Luke. And I think it's also because of what your conviction is too. Like for me, I truly believed in what we were selling and what we were doing, and we're passionate about it
Yes.
because I said my mission before, and I truly believe in that.
Mm-hmm.
We are trying to feed our communities, and we owe it to our communities to provide that access to healthy, nutritious foods,
Yep.
wherever
Yep.
it may be in this case.
It's
So I
bigger than
truly
you.
did.
It's
It's
bigger
bigger
than
than
you.
me.
Yes.
Absolutely. And that could be aspirational, but I always believe we need more
So what?
aspiration in our lives.
Right. Right.
Right. So to me, that was always at the core. And that's what drove the assertiveness. Because if I believed in
Yes.
something and I believed in a mission, whether it was a brand or a business or anything else, even in personal life,
Yes.
I'm gonna push it along for right, wrong, and indifferent. Now, at the same time, too, I speak from both sides of my mouth. Sometimes you got to pick and choose your battles in those
Mm-hmm.
situations
Yep.
and live to another day. But I had no issue of challenging an individual on the other side in a respectful way,
Mm-hmm.
in light of the mission. And I always believe in sharing, right?
Yeah.
Why I feel this way. Why is this important to me? And then also learn what's important to the other individual and try to come to
Yeah.
terms on how can we work on something together.
Yeah.
So I think it does come with authenticity when you're humble, and that's where that
Yep.
kind of assertiveness comes from, because you
Yep.
believe
Yes.
in what you're doing.
I love that. It's like humility with purpose. I think is really what it boils down to. And I think that's so beautiful that idea because I've done a number of episodes now. You're the first person to come on here and tell me your mission statement, right from the beginning. And I have the honor of working with so many missional leaders of CPG companies who truly want to make the world a better place. And I actually met with a potential client this morning that had written their purpose and shared it with me, and I'm like, this is so not inspirational. That's not even from your like that's like ho hum. I was really honest. I asked for permission to give the feedback honestly, but man, like when you come in when you share that mission and it really like wow, like as a grocery store retailer like in Hawaii for example, and you're sharing that with people you're working with, like I want to get on board on that. Yeah, I want to provide the communities we serve with options that would allow them to have more healthy hours, days, or years. I mean, that's really what we're giving here. And when you make it that way, it becomes more than just a job, right? Or just checking boxes, or more than just about any one person. It's really about something bigger than all of us here. That's I just want to celebrate that because it's so cool, Kenny.
Oh, thank you, Luke. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I believe that. And again, it's just the way I go about my business and my life. And mission statements are interesting, right? I mean, you got to be able to wrap your arms around it,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you can find that attachment and others can find that attachment, that's what truly makes it impactful. Though some folks might have different interpretations of what that
Mm-hmm.
could mean, it all goes to that true north, though. If it's as
Yeah.
concise and I'm not gonna say simple, but as clear enough,
Mm-hmm. Well,
it can be super
digestible.
impactful.
Yeah, I love it.
Exactly.
And so we talked about was Kyle your brother's name? Is that
Kyle.
yeah? So
Yes,
Kyle
sir.
Kyle was inspirational to you. Like who else was part of like they in a way we stand on the shoulders of so many people, right? And to be here, this idea of being missional, like there's something else that happened to you along the path. Like how did you get to this point? Were you this way at 7 years old, or were there mentors? Were there books you read? Like what got you here?
Variety of different things. I mean, through my experiences in life, for sure, helped shape that. But I'll be honest with you, Luke. It took me some time to hone it. Like I knew there was something inside of me that was maybe a little bit different, but it did take me some time to hone that. And I'll go to another family member first before I jump into
Yep.
professional mentors. I mentioned my grandfather,
Yes, you did.
and my grandfather and he passed away a year after my little brother, but he lived a very, very long life. he was so inspirational to me in so many ways. So my grandfather, he lived to about 88 years old. So he actually emigrated from Nazi Germany back in the late 1930s to live a better life, to live the American dream. And it's interesting. So he had to really, relearn life in general. Like he was, his family was somewhat, not going to say high status, but upper middle class in Germany. And everything that they did was basically they had to go back to square one coming back to the States. And he was living in the big city of New York City, which most immigrants ended up coming to. And he had to speak English, learn a different language, learn a different culture, but that drove him in his career and in his profession. He had 3 PhDs. He had a lot of different educational achievements.
Sorry, how many PhDs?
3. So
okay.
3, but and I'm the only businessman in my family. It's mostly teachers, educators. There's a couple doctors and a couple artists. My uncle is actually a professional cellist who plays in the Buffalo Philharmonic, which is a beautiful orchestra. But I digress. Going back to my grandfather, and he founded actually the dental school at the University of Buffalo. Gosh, probably like 55, 60 years ago. And, when I was growing up, it's interesting because we had such a close relationship, but a lot of folks think that we had this close relationship from the get-go. And honestly, we didn't, Luke. We didn't see eye to eye. I was a class clown. I was growing up. My grandfather, I think he really did see the potential in me. He's like, you got to get your act together. We sometimes butted heads, those sort of things, especially when I was a teenager. But then when my older brother, who was really kind of my grandfather's kind of apple in his eye, so to speak, he kind of turned to me and I turned to him. I said, you know what, Grandpa, I think we need to work on this relationship. We can at least, if it works, if it doesn't, we can at least look in the mirror and say, hey, we tried. And we were able to build this really rich relationship, Luke. Just such a rich relationship built on mutual respect, trying to learn from each other. He's just inspired me so many ways through his ambition, through his desire to want to travel the world, experience different cultures. My grandfather tried everything and anything just because he wanted to try. He was never afraid to try new things. He was so poignant in conversation, though he had his unique way of delivering his sometimes unwanted opinion at times. I learned so much from him. And when he passed, I learned even much more that inspired me, Luke. He did a lot of things in education, wrote a lot of different journals, fostered a lot of different ideas. But some of the things I learned about him after he passed away, I thought were even that much more impactful. One being really spearheading the inclusive and diversity movement at University of Buffalo. He was at the foundation of that, providing opportunities for minorities and underserved communities to get an education. And see, my grandfather never shared those things because he just thought that was the right thing to do. He didn't need to share that with the world. But to me, Luke, that speaks to personally myself more than his achievements in dentistry. Yes. I mean, these are things that have impacted the lives of so many. And for me to find this out and learn about this post his, unfortunate passing, I mean, it was just inspiring to me. And I think that's what kind of urged me, to move along and, get outside of Buffalo and experience the world. So I can't really speak enough on how both my little brother and as well as my grandfather have had such a positive impact on me.
See, it feels like I can see it. I can see why. And it seems like your dad was missional, like something bigger than himself. And also humility. It wasn't about telling you everything he did and why you should respect him, right? You didn't know everything he did. He didn't go announce it from the treetops, right? And that's beautiful. I'm curious, was your dad also involved in raising you and influencing you?
Yeah. So speaking, that was about my grandfather in particular. Yep. Yeah. My dad too, similar mindset. He worked really hard. He was just a good old fashioned worker. He was a radio personality by trade, but he soon found out that that's not going to really raise a family in terms of salary. Yes. So he had to make some sacrifices, for which I'm so grateful for. I actually had the opportunity to see him this past weekend. I flew out to Buffalo for a quick weekend trip. He's getting up there in years and he's, facing some medical challenges right now, but my dad's still independent, still super resilient. still my dad, and he had such an impact on me, even though he wasn't as involved in my early childhood.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't be because he had to work, and that is probably his one regret. But I will tell you, when I was a teenager through adulthood, super involved, super engaged, was really into all my hobbies, really encouraged the arts and music and those sort of things, and he was a big supporter of mine as well.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. And moving into the work environment, who was your most important mentor?
I have a couple. I have a lot. It's probably too many to name. I even consider yourself a mentor, Luke, for what you do for the industry and even the conversations we're having today. From day one, I really just appreciate your approach and everything that you do for the industry. But I'll narrow it down to two.
Thank you.
So my first major mentor, his name was Dave Bordenero, and he was my first director of grocery at the retailer I grew up in, Tops Markets, based in Buffalo, which I'm sure you know all about Tops. But, Dave was an interesting character. He was old school grocer, definitely old school, a fiery Italian guy. And he was loud and proud. But what I really appreciated about Dave was he was so dead focused on building the youth and bringing young talent within the organization at that time, because he knew, hey, the staff is aging, I'm aging, and I want to bring in individuals that have that passion and have a different perspective than myself to help potentially lead this organization. But it wasn't even about the organization to him. It was about the industry. He was so passionate about the industry in general. He wanted, to instill that on others that showed any enthusiasm whatsoever.
Yeah, that sounds like purpose, right? This purpose.
Totally.
Yes.
Totally. That was his purpose. And as old school as he was, he had a very modern mindset. He was always thinking to what's next. We had a really great working relationship. He would yell at me. He would challenge me.
Like literally yell?
Oh yeah. He would go down the cubicle hall saying, man, this is embarrassing. Kenny, these results were embarrassing, these sort of things. But I took it like for what it was worth. Yeah. But what I respected about Dave as well is he had a really good eye for talent and development. And this really spoke to me, and it's really modeled how I mentor and develop talent. He was one to make sure that you were given the resources in any role that you were in to be successful. And for me personally, he brought me on quite slowly through the industry, through the business. So I started as, an admin, what they called like a buyer's assistant, and then kind of methodically worked my way up. But he was very cognizant of my skill set, not because I didn't have the aptitude, but he wanted to make sure that I was overly ready to make that next step, Luke, into that next role, so I could make an immediate impact and stretch and learn for that next role and that next role and that next role. And that's what allowed me to do. And that spoke to me, because that's how I kind of approach mentorship and promoting individuals on my team. As now I'm leading a team, and I've led teams for the last better part of 5 years. That's really been really impactful for me. And it's really spoken to me. And I still keep in contact with Dave today. In fact, I actually saw him when I was back in Buffalo last weekend, which was great. So he's been definitely a huge influence on me. Totally different personalities, him and I, but I can respect him.
It sounds like it. And there's something there. Like, did you feel seen by him? Like, and maybe even encouraged, because like this guy here, who's like, I respect him. He walks on water. He's been doing this for a long time. And he's like spending this time with me, and he's encouraging me, and he's bringing me up. Does that resonate with you? Like you were seen for what your potential. He could see potential.
Yeah. You're definitely making me a little teary-eyed, Luke, just thinking about it. He did. He was like the first leader I had in professional business in my career that saw that potential, the quirkiness, the passion, all those things that I have. He saw it, and he saw what that could be, just needed to be honed in. And one of the proudest moments was, I remember he went on leave because he had a medical issue for about 6 months. And at that given point, I just got promoted to an associate category manager role, managing coffee and beverage and center store. And I was really growing into my own. And when Dave came back to take over the helm of grocery again, he could see the impact I was making. And he pulled me aside. He said, I don't know what happened in these last 6 months, Kenny, but I see something completely different in you.
And those
First
words,
of all,
you remember those words to this day.
Yes. I remember those words to this day. And he said, you are still you, but I just feel like this targeted passion and assurance in what you're doing and conviction of what you're doing and the calculated risks you take
Mm-hmm.
and just the way you carry yourself in the organization is completely different in that 6 months worth of time. And Luke, well, how did that switch go on? That I'm not entirely sure. Just one day it just did, and it could have been just through
Yeah.
that moment of Dave not being there, and I felt like the ownership of doing right by him and right by me and taking leadership, and that's kind of what changed that.
Yeah. No, I love that. And something that comes up for me that I'd like to spend a couple minutes on is I grew up the old school way too, right? Where especially like men in leadership roles, and it was mainly men back in the old days. And I'm glad it's different now, right? Um, it's much more inclusive, right? But
Mm-hmm.
especially for men raising boys in a company, so to speak, it was often intense, often in your face. They weren't worried about your self-esteem. In fact, they probably wanted to break you down on some level, right? And then build you back up. Um, I'm curious, like it got you to, if you're saying this was one of the core seminal experiences in your life, and this guy would like literally yell at you. Have we gotten too soft? And it's kind of a rhetorical question, but I'm curious, like, or did we just find better ways of doing it that maybe met a wider variety of people better where they were at?
Yeah, that's a very intriguing question, Luke. I wouldn't say we've gotten too soft. I think we found more productive ways to do it. You
Hmm.
know, I do feel like though there is a balance. We need to be direct with individuals,
Yes.
honest with individuals,
Yes.
especially as it relates to development, despite, who you are, and whatnot. I think we need to be sensitive to that. And I think we need to be direct. I think there's just more productive ways to do it than yelling and that sort of thing. But
Right.
there's a time and a place for it. But the thing about Dave, I will reiterate, is if he made a mistake, he'd be first to admit it.
Yeah.
He was very aware, and it came from a place of, of love and
Hmm.
wanting to see you successful. Would his approach be as effective today?
Right.
I'll be honest, it would probably get him a little bit of trouble.
Right.
But
Yes.
knowing him, he would be able to adapt.
Yeah.
I believe. But only
Yeah.
time would tell. But
Yeah.
I would say it's definitely. I think there's just more productive ways to do it,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. And I used to be I've had four kids from 27 to 7, and I remember when I was or 28 to 7, I was raising my 28-year-old. I used to spank and yell, and it's just interesting. Like then things changed, right? And we grow. And society changes, and I agree. I think it's a much better place today. So Dave was the mentor, right?
Dave was my mentor, and if I could briefly just share one more
Yeah,
influential person, because I
of
just feel like
course.
I owe it to this
Yes.
individual. So I mentioned him early on our call, Jonathan Lawrence. He's currently,
Amazing guy.
my VP. He's an amazing guy. I mean, if you know anyone in the natural industry, Jonathan Lawrence. And why was he so influential? It's like a cross section. Dave was super, I would call it old school, where Jonathan was super new school.
Hmm.
And he really just is a different type of leader. He is everything you would want. He leads by example. He's a servant leader. Not
Hmm.
only that, he has an internal mission. He grew up in the natural products industry. Personally, at Fresh Time, he's seen it from an inception through all the different stages through where it is today. And he just has a way of galvanizing the team and has such an amazing influence across the entire organization. And I truly look up to him in so many different ways. And he was
Hmm.
so impactful towards me. He was the first person I called when I came back to Hawaii, not because, or came back from Hawaii, not because I was looking to get back into Fresh Time per se. He's just a good friend and a mentor.
Hmm.
And he provided me some good advice. And of course, at the end of the call, he said, I'm not trying to be selfish, but would you ever reconsider coming back to work for us? And, at that point, the rest is history. But getting back to the center of the conversation, Jonathan Lawrence is just, everything you would expect out of a leader and so much more, so innovative in his approach. And what I admire about him so much over the last 2 years, because I've been gone for 2 years and now coming back, he's built a new level of confidence in his leadership
Nice.
presence across the organization, which is super admirable. And I think he realizes his voice, he doesn't have to say a lot, talk a lot, but he says
Hmm.
so much. And his
Yes.
words truly cause ripples throughout the organization that can instill positive change. And he challenges us all to feel that way and to think that way and be who we are as people in business, which
Yep.
is a super admirable.
No, I love it. I just interviewed him for this podcast recently, and what comes to mind is everything you said about him, and also this centeredness, mindfulness. This it's not like a bravado, like I'm so self-assured. It's just he's very comfortable in his own skin, and he's been doing this. He grew up in the business. He knows what he's talking about, and I can totally see. It's great to talk to someone so close to talking to him who has worked with him and is working for him now, with him now, to hear what you're saying. 'Cause that's what I would have thought after spending that time with him.
Yeah.
And yeah,
He's Zen. He's Zen. And he has to be, right? If
yes,
there's chaos going on in his mind, he doesn't allow that to come across to the team. And that's
no,
true leadership, from,
yeah,
at its core. And that's
yeah.
truly what Jonathan is, not just for Fresh Time, but for the industry.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing about your mentors. One thing that comes to mind, and I'm just curious if you have an opinion on this. You know, I, I grew up, and I think especially my kids grew up during a time where self-esteem was like really important. Like we want people to believe in themselves, and I once watched a TED talk and talked about this idea that, well, if the idea of self-esteem is like is my superiority, or how good I am, right? And and the problem is it's like if you go into a group, into a hall, and you say like who thinks they're exceptional, and more than half the people say yes. Well, we are not all exceptional in every way. But then I've been learning about this idea of self-compassion. And self-compassion says, I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes. Sometimes life's going to be hard. Um, Sometimes I'm not going to be at my best, and that's okay. That's part of the human experience. That's what that means. It is not about me being exceptional, right? Or comparing myself to anybody. It's just really this human experience. And it's I don't know, something about our conversation that brought those two concepts up to me, and I'm curious how you relate to them.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And you framed it really well. That TED Talk's a good TED Talk. You're gonna have to send that to me so I can learn a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, I think people construe self-esteem with that overconfidence. That's really not the case. I mean, to me, it's
Mhm.
being aware who you are, who
Mhm.
you're not, being comfortable within yourself, and sometimes being comfortably uncomfortable, if that makes sense. And
Totally. Yep.
so self-compassion is huge. And that's for me personally, I've had to work on a lot, especially over the last couple of years, to be patient with myself, allow me to be, who I am
Mhm.
every day and show up as that person. And, don't be afraid. It's interesting too. We talked about mentors. We all think about our mentors and we all spend this time of figuring out how can I be more like this person or that
Mhm.
person or this person. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. You take kind of the best
Yep.
from this, the
Yep.
best from that, and you come together, but you can't lose who you are
Yes.
either. So
Yes.
for me, that self-compassion and awareness has really helped me kind of mold my own style. And not only that, just be comfortable with it,
Yeah.
and I think that to me is at the root of self-esteem. At least that's my perspective,
Yeah.
but I
No,
think it,
I like how you shared that, and what I want to be a little bit deeper on that. Like you mentioned, something didn't work out in your career in St. Louis. I think it was right. And if you only have self-esteem, then and you're faced with this thing where something didn't work out, then it's like if it creates this like cognitive dissonance, right? There's like, well, how does this add up? I think it's fireworks here. So funny. But the idea of self-compassion is, hey, maybe this wasn't the right role for me, and that's okay. And I'm going to learn, and I'm human, and maybe I could have done better. I'm just curious as you relate back to that St. Louis experience, like what could you describe that struggle a little bit, and what happened?
yeah, yeah. And this is a good one. So I went to a retailer that just quite honestly wasn't a good fit. And I left Buffalo because I felt like it was time, right? And did I know what I wanted? I think I did. But at the time, I'll be honest with you, Luke, I was kind of chasing the dollar signs a little bit.
Hmm.
And I went to that organization for the wrong reasons, quite frankly. And I can admit it, I can admit it. And as I'm a big proponent of, well, I'm going to try to, instill my influence
Hmm.
in this organization. And that will be kind of because that's always been my mission too, as part of my personal
Yeah.
mission. Can I instill that within this organization? And when I found out I couldn't, because I just didn't have the bandwidth or maybe the mental fortitude at the time that I'm still kind of working on, I knew it was
Mhm.
time to leave. And it was a struggle because, man, I left Buffalo. I left a stable job. I left something I loved behind and family to pursue this. What did I just do?
Mhm.
And then I realized, what? This is a stepping stone of life. I'm
Mhm.
going to figure this out. And I reached out to some of my, other mentors, some friends to kind of counsel through this. But I'll be honest, there was a lot of self-reflection during that time.
Yeah.
And then I realized, what? I know where I want to be.
Perfect.
Going
Give you
back,
clarity. Yep.
it gave me clarity. And I kind of said, I'm going to apply to these places. And if it doesn't work out, I'm going to go backpacking across Europe if that doesn't work, and just take
I
a
love
year
it.
to kind of figure out
Yeah.
myself. But I didn't have to do that because I went to Fresh Time. And I'm so grateful for that experience, Luke, because not only did it connect me with some great individuals in the business, connected me with Kathy, my partner in
Yeah.
life, my
There we
better
go.
half,
There
you
we
know.
go. I love that. So there's been in this struggle, there was growth, there was reflection, and then hopefully you get that backpacking trip at some point in your career.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. We've definitely, again, going to Hawaii was such an amazing experience.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it kind of scratched that itch of living abroad, quote unquote. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I know it's the on continental
But
U.S.,
it's
but it's
very different than
but it's
Chicago.
very different. I tell people that if you have the mindset that Hawaii is the same as any other state across the country, it's not. You're not going to be successful there because it's a completely different culture. It's a
Mm-hmm.
completely different, vibe, which the vibe is just an amazing. I know that sounds somewhat cliche, but
Mm-hmm.
the vibe is really the environment, the people, the culture, just everything that you have the opportunity to experience and learn. And that's what truly makes Hawaii a special place. And that allowed us to kind of scratch that itch.
Yeah. Yeah. What a journey. And you're just so brave to like leave everybody and try this out for a season, right? It's a season. And life is long. So then you came back home. So that's beautiful. And going back to your St. Louis journey and kind of back like for fresh time at that point, I guess. Yeah, I've been there too. I had my own Chicago journey working for KE, and I
Mm-hmm.
sold my company to them, and I was supposed to be there for about 5 years, left after two, and that was a really that was really really hard to leave there. But you're right. Like when you know something isn't right and not right for you, not that the people aren't right, not great, a great organization, right? But it's like, but it was hard. I remember having like even like nightmares and stuff, and it affected me. Like, oh, why didn't this work the way I wanted it to? And you're right, that reflection led me to doing like what I'm doing now, which I love. It led me to my fiance, it led me to your point, all these things. And it's like, and it makes me wonder, like, was there some form of destiny in all this, right? Like, was this all supposed to happen this way? And then, I mean, and that's what I think it had. I think there is destiny, and then it helps me realize, like, oh, this is all just part of this like journey that my higher power already knew about before I was born, and yeah, and it's like, okay, I get it now. It's all for good in the end. Does that
Yeah,
resonate?
totally resonates. I think about that often. It's like, was this path my
Yep,
destiny?
yep,
And all the lefts and the rights,
yep,
I've taken in my life. I mean, and you know what? It makes me smile because I'm like, what else is that, in
yep.
store for me? That's what makes me think about the unknown. I mean, of course, I always like to keep sight what's in front of me because I truly believe in
Hmm.
order to take steps forward, you can't lose sight what's in front of you because then you're going to not know where you're going.
Yep.
But at the same time, like I'm super intrigued on like what is next for Kenny Hausmann?
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
next for all of us? You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And it's so interesting to me that when you look back, like when someone shares their story with me, and I talk to new people all the time, and it's like, oh, it all looks preordained, right? When you look back on it. But when you're in the moment, at any particular moment, like it's so far from ever feeling preordained, like what's going to happen, right? And there's to your point, you said the zigs and the zags and the lefts and the right. But then if you zoom out, you can see there was this path, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I get it. That little jaunt was like nothing compared to this bigger, like the arc of my life, the story arc of this entire life. Those little parts are all building blocks to get to that point, that to where you're at today and where you'll be 10 years ago from now and 20 years from now. It's all beautiful. Does that
Yeah,
resonate?
that totally resonates. I mean, you just have a way with words, Luke. You can really surmise it for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a journey. And to your point too, the zoom out's important, right? Because in the moment you're like, oh, what's going on? This is so, I don't know, terrible, right? But at the same time, you're like, it's such a blip in this
Yep.
path called life. It's not really that much. And I also am like an optimist at heart too. I always try to find the good in everything.
Yes.
You know, even in the darkest situations, you know, and my team even said the other day, it's like, Kenny, you can find the positive in anything. And I'm like, but it's genuine, right?
Yeah,
It's not, I'm
right.
not trying to manufacture and fabricate it because, you know, there are times where there may not be a lot the glean in terms of positivity, but I truly believe that through those times, you got to be realistic. But at the same time, like if you're not trying to find the positive, then you're never going to find the positive,
Yeah,
I
right.
guess, you know?
Or in my mind, you'll manifest more of what you don't want. And so
Exactly. Well put.
yeah, for me, it's like I read a book called The Secret. Did you ever read that book?
I actually haven't. It's on my list. I'm
Okay.
reading a couple of other books right now that's taken precedence. I do a lot of audiobooks and
Yeah, me
podcasts.
too. Me too.
I'm an audio learner.
What are you listening to right now?
So, I mean, I'm listening to, let me see. Now I'm going to have to look it up,
No
Luke.
worries. No worries. But
So I'm actually reading the book called Setting the Table. So
Ooh.
Setting the Table is an interesting book. It's about the food service industry
Okay.
and
Oh, I
hospitality
heard
and
about
those
this.
sort of things.
That's a really good
Yeah,
book. I want that
it's
on
a
my list too.
yeah. So that's what I'm reading right now. I read some business books. It just depends, but that's the one I'm reading right now because I'm like, you know what? I want to try to learn something new from the food service industry and how can I apply that to my life. And we're in the hospitality business,
You are.
and whether it's
Yeah.
retail, I mean, I think that was just something that resonated with me. I listened to a couple podcasts that recommended that book, so I was like, I'm going to jump right into that. I'm also reading Do Hard Things as well, so that's another interesting book. So
I'm
that's just
making
about
notes.
yeah, that's just a book just about what we're talking about, right? You have to do hard things in order to learn and to grow. Very short read. You could probably get it done in a day, in less than a day.
Cool.
I'm an audio listener. Some people would argue is that reading. I'm like, for me, it is.
It is.
I mean,
It is.
it's totally reading. I mean, for me, I don't know. My wife is a English professor,
Mhm.
and I've definitely learned a lot from her. But for me, it's just books. I can read some books, but typically I have to read them over 2 to 3
Me
times.
too.
But when I listen, it just, I don't know, stimulates my
Yeah.
mind in a different way.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. And again, celebrating, kind of who you are and this kind of optimistic openness to the world, and a lot of that too is like the commitment to lifelong learning that you clearly have, right? And like no one's forcing you to do this, and you're choosing because you want to continue growing, and that's I love that. That's what I work on that as well. Um, oh, I'm cool. I'm curious about the new role. So you
Mm-hmm.
had never done, is it healthy living before? This is new for you. How are you approaching this? Like there's so much there. There's such a depth of like knowledge about even individual ingredients in this space. How do you do this? Just walking in.
That's a really good question. Well, first and foremost, great team. I have a
Awesome.
great team and lead a great team. Very strong, woman leaders in business, which is
Mhm.
just amazing, and just strong leaders in business in general. So that's at the foundation of it all, right? So what I bring to the table is the leadership, the category management, the experience, the passion, and the strategic direction. But they know so much about the products we sell. So, natural living for our organization is such an important piece when we talk about vitamins, supplements, body care, non-foods, that area. And the way I've approached it is that humble approach, like I typically do.
Mhm.
I'm really allowing the team to really teach me and coach me on the ins and outs of the business from both a product knowledge
Mhm.
standpoint and just how the business operates. And you can probably see in my face, I'm just re-inspired.
Yeah,
It's
I can
brand
tell.
new for me. It's just been so invigorating, and just the passion from our team members is just so amazing. And it has to be, because to your point, it's a complex business. You're talking about
Yes.
ingredients, you're talking about structure and function when it comes to supplements and vitamins. And what is also inspiring to me too, as the business has changed, we are still predominantly in this cross section of space a lot of mission-based
Yes,
brands and
totally.
businesses.
Yep.
And the core of how the natural industry was built is still at the forefront of this area of business. And that's what excites me too. And honestly, Jonathan and I talk about this a lot. How do we bring these missions of these brands to light in our stores in a bigger way and not just
Right.
riding the coattails on what they're doing? How can we complement it? How can we really take it to the next
Yep.
level, whether it's regenerative agriculture,
Totally.
or whether it's organizations like Vitamin Angels, which we're a big supporter of, to help provide access to vitamins women and children during the most important times of their lives. These are missions we truly get behind. And getting back on track here, that's what's really inspired me.
Mm-hmm.
So how I've approached it is how I've approached other roles, but with the difference being, I'm learning something new. So I have to be very comfortable not knowing what I don't know.
Right.
Um, so that's been great. And I think it's been great for the team too, because it's helped them build their leadership presence a little bit
Yeah.
more, because I'm challenging them in a different way, but they also had to get me up to speed and be patient with my quirks and the way I kind of like to do
Mm-hmm.
business. But I'm a big structure person, not for the sake of having it, just to allow us to be
Mm-hmm.
more flexible.
Yep.
Because if you have a structure to follow, I truly believe that allows you to be more creative in the long term.
Yep.
So
I agree.
that's been fun. But I've just been having a ball. I've been having a ball with it.
That's awesome. And I think there's something here about leadership, right? Because I think a lot of people believe that as a leader, you need to know everything, right? And you need to be the smartest person in the room. And so I'm curious then, like, how do you see your role, right? Are you an orchestra leader, or like what is that, like getting the symphony to play together, or what is it to be a leader in like where you're at today?
Well, I'll start with just a little tongue in cheek here. If I was the smartest person in the room, it's not a very smart room. So I'll leave it at
Okay.
that. I'll leave it at that. But no, in all due respect, yeah, it's a good question. Like, I do orchestra. Yeah, I mean, it's almost kind of like you're a jazz band leader, so to speak.
Yeah, there we
That's
go.
the way I kind of feel like Fresh Time, because we know how to improvise. We can
That's
comp on
totally
chords,
fresh
if
time.
you will.
Yes.
Do different things, but yet we all have the ability to kind of work and play off each other. We're
Hmm.
not all classically trained. We may not know exactly what we're doing at times, but we know how to get to the result. So
Beautifully
that's kind of
said.
the way I lead the team. I'm a jazz fan at heart, but that's how I would explain it. Like, we know enough theory to do what we want to do, but we don't know enough theory to be more creative and take calculated risks and
Hmm.
learn and do things that are different in the industry, because we have the latitude to do it.
Yeah.
So that's kind
No,
of been my approach.
that's beautiful. And I love how you made it more you, the jazz band leader, and I think that's it. I think what I noticed in my career is that there's so many subject matter experts. People are really good at something, right? At a specific task, or a series of tasks, or an area. But the person that's able to get all these SMEs, especially subject matter experts, right? Like all like leveraging all their knowledge and intelligence and bringing to fruition, like together, and figuring out the priorities and the systems and processes, and that there's a magic there, that the leader, a leader who's on their game brings. And I can tell that this is a culmination of everything you've been through in your career, to be walking into something somewhat cold, and what you have are your abilities to be a leader, the way you communicate, the way that you are, your humility, the ability to inspire others, and the ability to see a vision and a mission and to be able to execute against that. It seems like what you brought to bear here. And I sense it could even be better that you don't know everything about this space.
Exactly. And in fact, I said that exact, even to Jonathan the other day in my team, it's actually better that I don't, because it allows me to just apply what I know
Yep.
and what I don't know and try to make it work
Yep.
for us.
Yeah.
And my philosophy too is everyone has a seat at the table, right? It's
Yep.
not my idea. It's not your
Yep.
idea. It's our idea.
Mhm.
And, there are going to be times where we do things we don't like, right? It's just part of it.
Yep.
There are going to be things that I may ask you to do that we're not going to be entirely enthusiastic about, but we have to do those things because we're running a business. And
Yes.
two, that will allow us to do the things that we want to do, that we're focused on. And my philosophy too is, as their leader, I want to try to remove all the roadblocks for them, Luke, so they can
Mhm.
do what they do best, connecting with our
There we
vendors,
go.
connecting with the
That's
industry,
that's a leader.
doing
Yep.
what they do.
Yep.
I want them. out of the minutia. I'll shield them from all those things and, some of the
Mhm.
conversations we have, yet include them on higher level conversations that are important. I'm a sharing type of person. I
Yep.
don't like to share too much because I always say sometimes team knowledge is not a gift. So, at times, so
Right.
I will tell you what you
Yeah.
what you need to know, not what just you need to know, but I might give you a little more information than previous leaders. But that's because I feel it's important for you to understand what's going on
The
within
deeper
the
meaning.
organization and the business, right? And take
That's
with it what you will. But that's always my philosophy. I'll remove the roadblocks, and you can do what you do best.
I love that. Beautifully said. Now let's move on to supply chain. As you know, part of the Reconnected podcast is talking to industry leaders from every aspect of the supply chain and us ideally coming together and like how we do this better. And as you think about the kind of the manufacturer today and kind of as a composite out there, the manufacturer, um, what are things that as you know in your experience and what you're seeing that if you could speak to manufacturers today about like how they can show up better to succeed and better serve the supply chain, what do you want them to know today?
Mm, that's a very interesting question. Very interesting question. I think that what I would like them to know, well, first and foremost, any interaction you have in business, whether it's with retail, your supplier partners, your ingredient partners, it is a
Mhm.
partnership. We're
Yeah.
all into this together. So let's keep that, at top of mind. And we're all trying to get to the same thing.
Yep.
We're trying to deliver a service, feed our communities, whatever your personal mission statement is, always keep that at the highest point of your thought process when you're interacting with any
Mhm.
other individual. I know that's kind of a cerebral thought, but I always go to that because I think it starts there.
I
And I
think it is
think these
too.
types of, yeah, I
Yeah.
think these internal conversations need to be had. Some people say talk is cheap, but I believe that really serious and honest self-reflection and talk can lead to impactful actions.
Yep.
So that's just my philosophy. I would say that. I would also say too, I think especially when we talk about supply chain, it's such a complex, you know, thing, right? For lack of a better term, there's so many components into it. And I think that we all as an organization, speaking from retail, we got to get beyond just the transaction and we got to
Agreed.
really have these higher level conversations and how we get better at supply chain to ultimately be better for our communities, better to our farmers, better
Hmm.
to our suppliers, and how we continue to make a positive impact within our food system. So I don't think I directly answered your question, but
No,
through there,
but
that would be like what
yeah.
I would say. Like this is like that's what drives you, right? And whatever
Mhm.
tactics you have to follow, whatever you need to do, that should be at the root of how you approach your
Right.
business from a supply chain
No,
perspective.
I agreed, and I think you said it really well. And I think, but ripping off of what you said on the manufacturer side, like what was your mission, what your values, and at the end of the day, like getting through our supply chain, getting on shelf and getting off shelf is how we, especially in this natural space, is how we make the world a better place, create healthier communities, healthier families, healthier people, and I think that's awesome. I hear a lot of concern about the manufacturers in terms of like the national distributors and the challenges they face and the deductions and just the cost of getting there. And in terms of that, like as a retailer, like what is the message? Because you choose your distributor and you need to use distributors that can handle your business, which is why and give you the ability to be competitive, right, in terms of the pricing and everything else too. And yet there's this perception often that there's like that these distributors aren't really, are causing some pain. And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, depends on the distributor.
Yeah.
For sure. Depends on whom you're doing business with. Every retail is a little bit different as well on how they partner with
Hmm.
distributors. I could speak specifically, predominantly for natural business and
Hmm.
our business. It's a necessary, I guess, evil, if you will, right? We do
Hmm.
not have the capacity to be able to get the assortment depth that
Yep.
our customers would need for us to be relevant in our trade areas, right? So we
Hmm.
have to partner with distributors. And I say partner, right? I
Hmm.
want our brands to know you're not alone in this, right?
Right.
We need to know what's going on,
Hmm.
because ultimately, whatever deductions happen, what sometimes the distributor doesn't realize is that ultimately has a negative impact on us, the
Yep.
retailer, and the customer. Because let's be honest, brands have a bucket of trade that can be spent, right? They
Yep.
have a bucket of trade.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that ultimately you could spend it in a multitude of ways. And I also get it on the distributor side. Their revenue streams are built in different areas,
Yep.
and I get it, but we need to come to terms on how we can partner together to improve that and ultimately improve our supply chain. So I guess there's not a short-term answer to that. I think for personally, like my approach, transparency, right?
Yep.
Know that we're in it, we understand it, and know that on our side, we're advocates for our brands. Because I feel, some people may say, do you owe a brand anything? And my opinion is, well, not necessarily, but I feel like as a retailer, and my personal mission and values are, it's our mutual responsibility to assure emerging brand is successful at our stores. And if they're not, it's because we've tried everything possible to make them successful, and it just didn't work. And that's okay. But that is our mutual responsibility. And I think just clear communication, that understanding that we hear you, we see you, we understand it. Please know that we're having other conversations about how we can partner with our distributor partners in more of a strategic way that helps emerging brands. Because you think about being a differentiator too in retail.
Right.
A lot of folks overlook vendor relations. That's a huge piece.
Yep.
Like there's so many big brands, little brands, emerging brands. It's a point of differentiation if you can partner with your brands in such a robust way and in an open way. For me, I want us to be known, Fresh Time to be known as a partner that vendors want to partner with, not partners that or not a retailer they have to.
I love that.
we pride ourselves on that, and that's through that communication and transparency. And it can be challenging at times for sure, but that's the approach.
No, I love what you said, and what comes up for me from what you said is, you choose the retailer gets to choose the distributors that they work with. Distributors build out a supply chain all around that, and the supply chains are extremely expensive. Today, what the distributors charge, like a Fresh Time, is often below their cost of operations. And really what's changed in the market that I think people are still getting their arms around is that today manufacturers are expected to kind of help fill that gap between the profit gap, because in order to make the whole supply chain operate. And I think that's what we're still adapting to. And you mentioned transparency, and I agree. And it's written, and the more that we can help emerging brands understand like what those costs are that will be shifted back to them to help make the supply chain operate, that's where we win. And I think that's one of the things I've tried to do is I've led some master classes, and I think other people are too. Like, hey, this is what it costs. It's going to cost you maybe 7 to 12% on the buy side for a national distributor. Just build that in, right? Be prepared for that, and don't let it be a surprise to you, because it's going to hit you. And so, I think transparency theme. I think that's really what we can do better as a supply chain. Does that resonate?
Totally. It's exactly kind of, and again, you said it much more concisely than I did. So sorry, I tend to go off on tangents.
No, I thought you did great. I was ripping off of you. So
yeah, it's exactly that. And, it's not going to change overnight, but I do feel like, again, through the conversations we can have as all partners in the business, we can make positive change, whether you're a big company or a small company. I mean, again, the bigger the company you are, absolutely, you could say, well, it's more difficult, but I challenge you to work in the scope of your role to figure out how you can make a positive difference. And sometimes you got to get out of your lane a little bit to make things happen. Yeah. That's just also my philosophy.
I agree. I love it. Kenny, thank you for taking this time with me today.
Yeah, absolutely, Luke. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I got to know you so much better, and the more I get to know you, the more I love you. So I'm grateful for what you're doing for our industry, for what you're doing at Fresh Time, and I'm grateful for our friendship, and look forward to continuing to build it over the rest of our lives.
Thanks, Luke. I echo your statements.
Okay. Take care, my friend.
Take care.